Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to County Theatre. It's lovely to see you this afternoon, so thank you for coming along. My name is Samantha Watson, and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager for County Theatre. And I'm also one of the people who are involved in the Surrey Heath Book Festival, which happened this May. There was 3 age categories. There was the under 11s, there was the 11 to 13s, and then there was the adults writing competition, which was 18 above. So let's start off with the under 11s. Now the winner for this one was Sophie Roberts for her story, Halloween Horror. So would you like to come up to the stage, Sophie?
Jess was excited. Maddie dreaded it. Every year they went trick-or-treating. Maddie and Jess tiptoed up to the wooden doors of an old house. As Maddie pushed open the doors, they heard ear-deafening screams. They walked through the hallway and up some stairs. The steps creaked with every move. Wondering what would happen, Maddie clutched Jess's hands as they nervously went through the nearest door. They heard clinking of swords and ghosts fighting like knights of old. They ran out screaming, shutting the door behind them. Not knowing what they'd discover next, they found themselves in a room with shadowy white shapes, moaning as they drifted from one side to the other, as if they were trapped. They slammed the door shut and ran to hide. Thinking that they were safe, for a moment they relaxed and caught their breath. Suddenly, a shot of ice-cold air blasted across their faces. Bones started falling from the rafters above. Thousands of bats flew towards them, chasing them out the room. More frightened than they had ever been, they ran for their lives. That night, Maddie couldn't sleep. Lying in her bed, she pulled the covers over her face with her teddies by her side to help her feel safe. Every sound seemed eerie. Jess, on the other hand, slept peacefully all night long. She loved it. She had set the whole thing up.
Now, one of the prizes that Sophie has in her bag is a book token that was kindly donated by the Waterstones as well, so I'm sure she'll have hours of happy reading. Right, the next category, which is 11 to 13-year-old, now that was won by Alec Churchill.
Dear loving mother and father, it's been an entire week since I was evacuated, but I must confess I love this darling village. It has a beautiful library full of fascinating books. The smell of the baker's rare sugar goods tempts you towards it. My mistress is called Mrs. Manadori, but everybody calls her Granny Manor. I can't give you the address, as Granny Manor thinks this letter will be intercepted. She's worried about everything. Last night I caught her sweating over the risk of cutting herself on the milk bottle top. I've made friends with the baker's daughter, Gertrude Woolworth. Her father, jolly old Mr. Woolworth, is so kind to me. He's chubby and soft and has a massive beard, but hardly any hair on his head. Whenever I go over to their house, he always gives me sugar delicacies for me and the mistress. Gertrude has jet black hair and she tries back in a ponytail every day. And she wears thick-rimmed glasses that make her look like a scientist. How are things back home? I heard John had to leave for the Ministry of Fuel. It sounds difficult, but I bet it's really interesting. I know at home you always used to say I had too many worries, but now all I worry about is England, my home, and of course, you. Well, I must go. The mistress is panicking after getting a paper cut from her Russian book. Wishing you well, from Alicia.
And then we have our adult story winner, which was Richard Jackman for his story, Grand Popsicle.
He sat by the window of his old people's flat and watched the world gradually turning red as the sun dipped below the hedge at the bottom of the garden. The first day he'd arrived here, he'd watched the sunset and thought it was the sun going down on his life. Now, 5 years later, he'd settled in, and though he wouldn't admit it to the Fae, the warden, he was happy here. His peace was shattered by a knocking at the door. It was his neighbour, Frank, returning his newspaper. He liked to play cards with Frank, but the only problem was all he wanted to talk about was the war, the one thing Ted didn't want to discuss. As far as Ted was concerned, there are some things best forgotten. Not that he'd forgotten the war, he just didn't want to be reminded of it. At least, not his war. Sorry, Frank, I can't stop. I'm just about to eat. Frank nodded and went back to his flat. He'd just finished his granddaughter Jill's frozen lasagna and was enjoying his cup of tea when his mobile phone started buzzing. This was another thing Jill had left him, but unlike her food, he hated it. He unfolded the phone, grateful that at least it wasn't one of those smartphones Jill and her daughter Alice used. He studied the large numbered keyboard, careful not to push the wrong button again, and punched the green key. Hello? Hello, Great-Grand Popsicle? Oh, it's the pest, he said with a smile. He loved his granddaughter dearly, but her daughter Alice was the light of his life. What can I do for you? I was wondering if I could come and see you on Saturday. Let me consult my diary. Alice giggled. She'd heard it before, but loved it. What time did you have in mind? About 10, if you can fit me in with your busy schedule, she said, happy to continue the joke. And to what do I owe this pleasure? Well, I've got a project to do for school, and Mum said you'd know all about it. And what would your project be about, he queried. I'll tell you all about it on Saturday. Sorry, Pops, got to dash, dinner's nearly ready. See you Saturday. And the line went dead. He sat and wondered what the project might be. Please don't let it be about the war, he mused. If it was, he had a predicament. Could he say no to Alice? There again, perhaps he should talk about it before it was too late. And if he was going to talk to anyone, it could only be Alice. I want to know all about Shakespeare, said Alice. She had arrived on time, made him a cup of tea, and settled down next to him on the settee with her notebook. Ted breathed a sigh of relief, plumped up his cushion, and got his brain into gear. Shakespeare. So, which of his plays are you reading? Oh, it's not his plays. I want to know all about him, the man. Seb sipped his tea. So what do you know so far? Not much, said Alice with a shrug. That's because there isn't much to know. So let's start at the beginning. When was he born? Oh, that's easy, said Alice with a smug smile. 23rd of April, 1564. Ah, that was he, replied Ted with an equally smug smile. The only thing we know for sure is that he was baptised on the 26th of April. And as he died on the 23rd, St George's Day, it was convenient to set his birth there too. And as Shakespeare might have said, why let the facts get in the way of a good story? You mean Shakespeare lied? Oh no, he wasn't a historian or a travel writer. He wrote wonderful plays. So you're sure he did write them then? Some people would debate that. Yes, they say it might have been the Earl of Oxford, Kit Marlowe, Francis Bacon. I'm glad it wasn't him. Oh, why's that, Pops? Well, we'd have to rename our foremost theatre company the Royal Bacon Company. I'll lend you a book to take home with you. It will tell you all about it. What about his lost years? Do you think he went to Italy? Well, if he did, he should have taken more notice where he went. Oh, why do you say that? Well, in the Taming of the Shrew, he was a sailmaker in Bergamo, probably the most landlocked city in Italy. In The Tempest, he has Prospero set sail from Milan, 2 days' journey from the sea. And in the 2 plays in Venice, he never mentions a canal, which seems a little strange. Oh, slow down a minute, Pops, I'm trying to write this down. Once she caught up, she sipped her tea. This is actually called Great-Grand Popsicle. Ted sat by the window of his old people's flat and watched the world gradually turning red as the sun dipped below the hedge at the bottom of the garden. The first day he'd arrived here, he'd watched the sunset and thought it was the sun going down on his life. Studied any of his plays? Yes, we've watched Henry IV and read Richard III. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Yes. Those wars were horrible. No wars are very nice, darling. Yes, of course. You were in the war, Pops, weren't you? Was it very bad? Ted drained his cup and handed it to Alice. Make me a fresher cup of tea, love, and I'll tell you all about it. Alice placed the fresh cup of tea in front of Ted and sat patiently with her new book, waiting for him to begin. My mum was furious when I told her I volunteered. Why did you volunteer? Well, as I told her, All my mates had enlisted, so I couldn't stay home and watch them go off to war, could I? He said. And that's what your Uncle Alf said in 1914, she added. Did he come home? No. 3/4 of an hour later, Alice put her notebook down, so wrapped up in his story she hadn't written a thing. Tales of his training and being shipped out to France. As he told her the story of one tank battle, she realised her eyes were sore, she'd forgotten to blink. Then the retreat to Dunkirk and his capture and imprisonment. He paused for a drink of tea. Did you escape? She asked excitedly. I nearly did, he replied, then sat for a while staring into his cup. What happened? She whispered. My mate got a letter saying his little boy was very ill, so I convinced him to go in my place. Oh, Grandpa, that was lovely. Did he get home? Ted paused. No, he was picked up the next day and then shot. There was a long silence as he sucked his tea. Then he continued. After that, the old war wound started acting up, so I stayed put until it was all over. What war wound, Popsicle? What happened? Alice was dumbfounded at his casual reply. Oh, that. I was shot at Dunkirk. That's why I didn't get home. We were the last bridgehead and I was shot in the leg, so I couldn't make it back to the beach. You were shot, she said, willing him to laugh and say he was joking. Yes, he said casually. A lot of us were. Most a lot worse than me. Why didn't Mum tell me all about it? Because I never told your Mum, he said after a pause, suddenly aware that it had all come out for the first time. I never told anyone before. Alice burst into tears and jumped on his lap and hugged him. Ted hugged her to him and couldn't let her go, mainly because he didn't want to see the tears flowing down his cheeks. Alice finally jumped up, delved into a handbag for a hanky and dried her eyes. Then, looking at her great-grandfather, reached down and dried his as well. Oh, great-grandpopsicle, you've got to write that down. He took Alice's hanky and blew his nose before answering. Oh, I'm not sure I could do that at my age. No, she squealed, jumping up excitedly. I could use it for my media final piece. I could come and interview you on video. Ted was aghast at the very idea. But before he could say no to the vision sprang into his head of the German officer that had captured him, and his chilling resistance is futile. He looked up into Alice's sparkling blue eyes and noticed the beaming smile illuminating her young face. Okay, darling, if you say so.
The prize for the overall score, for the overall stand of the competition, it was very high, it was very, very difficult to judge, it took us a very long time, but we felt the books from Helen McKenna should go to Mitchett Primary School for their library. Yes, we have somebody from Mitchett here. Come to the stage.
These are the castles, replied his dad. Tommy turned around to see nothing except piles of rot wood and rot. He wandered off as a man working there, who was quite old, was having a conversation with his dad. Tommy was exploring an old jousting area when he tripped on something hard. Ouch, he cried. Something was sticking out of a molehill.
He was approximately 9 weeks old, whereas Rose was 7.5 years old. Rose's dad was called Simon and her mum was called Rachel. One sunny morning, Rose was happily playing with Nibbles on her carpet by dangling down a small piece of string with a piece of chopped apple on the end to see if Nibbles could catch it. When suddenly the kettle went off and made a noise which frightened Nibbles, and she quickly ran up the radiator.
One day at school, me and my class were learning about the Egyptians, but just as we were getting onto the mummification part, we heard a loud banging sound. As we stepped outside, we saw smoke coming from the nature reserve. Me and 4 of my friends immediately ran to search the nature reserve. We heard the teacher calling us from behind, but we were too focused on finding what the sound was.
Daisy and Matthew were brother and sister. Daisy was 7, her big bossy brother was 10. Daisy had interesting adventures. Let me tell you one. One cold and windy day, Daisy was playing her favourite game, collecting stones. Daisy pretended that her special stones were exciting objects like dinosaur eggs and magic buttons.
My deep slumber was broken. Whispering voices and something forcing my right door open made me sit up. I couldn't call out, and my owner hadn't fitted our crook lock. Oh dear, I now have a hooded stranger sitting in her seat, breaking my steering column and crossing my wires.
He went back to his stepmother. I want to play. Like this, she told him, her heavy skirts rustling as she seated herself at the instrument. She turned up the gas lamps, wiped her hands on her apron, held them for a moment over the keys, and began to play.